Based on the questions that I've had to answer in the drop-in session so far, I've decided to put together a video specifically for exporting your 3D model from 3D Studio Max over to Maya. The process isn't very difficult. We're going to use the FBX material, or sorry, not material, the FBX export option to achieve the end result. And I'm just going to go through the steps that I would normally go through myself if I were to tackle this pipeline for a project. One thing I do want to talk about first, based on, again, some of the questions I've been asked that are kind of common and keep coming up again and again, is one, your model, is it in separate pieces? And if it is, what should you do with it? You can leave it in separate pieces. It's fine. It doesn't have to be one mesh. And it gives you a little bit of flexibility in Maya when it comes to placement and animation. If it's something that needs to be animated, if these wheels need to rotate independently, for example, and it's going to be animated there, then I wouldn't want to include them as part of the car mesh. I would want them separate so I could animate them and set keyframes on them easily. If it's a rigged character, chances are you're not going to be able to combine it all into one piece, something like that. So it's okay to save it out as multiple pieces. It doesn't really change anything. It just being aware of it and thinking of it in the first place is the most important part. If you aren't going to put it into and attach it into one model, then you should label everything clearly ahead of time. That way you won't be confused in Maya as to what's what if you are starting to go through the mesh there and want to organize it differently. So definitely label things first and get that taken care of. The same is true for the materials. I recommend labeling your materials as well so that you've got each map and material labeled clearly so that there's no confusion when you bring it over. If you do want to attach it in Max before you bring it to Maya, you can. I would use the attach list command or tool to do that. Just select any one part of your mesh. It doesn't really matter which. Go into your modifier list, or sorry, your modify menu, and then scroll down to edit geometry, and you will see attach and attach list. If you click attach list, that's the quickest and easiest method for something like this. I want to pretty much attach everything in the scene, so attach list will give me a list of everything in the scene. And yeah, if I just select everything here, hit attach, and oops, go back to object mode, and now you can see I've got one large piece. Everything is connected. There's been no vertices welded or anything like that, so you can tear it apart pretty easily if you need to using the detach command. But for ease of selection and organization in Maya, you can do it ahead of time. Again, check the name to make sure that the name that was inherited is the one that makes the most sense. It's pretty much based on whatever you selected. Because I started with car body as my selection, I think, when I ran the attach command, that's where the name came from. But either way, if you have to rename it, go ahead and do it. It's pretty quick and easy. I'm actually going to undo that. There we go. And I'm going to bring it into Maya in pieces because I'd like to also show you how to handle it there. So once you got everything labeled, everything's organized, the last step I would tackle just before you export, just to be safe, is to clear out any redundant or any modifiers at all at this point. You shouldn't need to bring any data or keep any data in an uncollapsed modifier at this point. Obviously, I would recommend saving a version of this file before you collapse the stack, just in case. But for the version that you're going to be bringing over to Maya, you don't want anything in the stack. Every modifier in the stack could cause issues. So it's safest just to get rid of them. And by get rid of them, the way I would do it, I would just select all the meshes, every piece that you need. Right click on the car and just go to convert to editable poly. That will effectively collapse the stack on every piece you had selected. And now if I select it, you can see each piece is now just a basic editable poly with UV maps and all that stuff built in, and pretty much baked down to its simplest form at this point. Now it should be very compatible, and there shouldn't be any surprises in Maya. So at this point, I'm going to go to File, Export, Export. I'm exporting the entire scene. I made sure that I made a version of the file that has just the elements that I want to export included. Just keeps it cleaner. But yeah, hypothetically, you could choose export selected instead and just select the pieces that you want to bring out. But since I'm grabbing the entire scene, I will export the whole thing. I'm going to give it a name, so I'm just going to call this car export. .fbx. Make sure fbx is the file format. It should be the default, but always check. Then save. Oops, be careful. I almost put it in the wrong folder. Always check your project folder to make sure it's going to the right place. This is where I want to save it, my scenes folder. Now, fbx file format. Now this part actually is important depending on what version of Max and Maya you're using. By default, when you open this exporting options, FBX file format will probably be closed, and you'll probably just see this actually. Advanced options will be, the rollout will be closed. So to find it, you're going to have to open up the advanced options rollout, then open up the FBX file format rollout, and then within that you'll have your version option for the FBX plugin. If you want to play it safe, pretty much any version older than the oldest version of software that you're using should be safe. So if you're using Maya 2020 and Max 2020, then any of these should work. But if you're using Maya 2020 and Max 2021, and there was an option in here for FBX 2021, for example, even though there's not, that version of the plugin must not be available yet, then you would choose the 2020 version, because you can only use one that's at the same level or lower than the version of software that you're using. For me, I'm using Max 2021 and Maya 2020, so I should be able to use the 2020 preset with no problems. But for what we're doing, if you want to play it safe, don't be afraid to try a legacy version and try an older version. I often use the 2014-15 because it used to be the default. So for right now, I'm going to try 2020 and see what happens. It should be fine. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention at this point, if you are using 3D Studio Max 2021 and bringing it over to Maya 2020, I found out while helping some people today by accident that it seems like the 2021 version of Max actually allows, or it saves the file in a format that Maya understands from a material standpoint. So it actually will bring your Arnold materials over, and you will actually be able to skip the step that I go through in the original tutorial, where essentially video number 2, where I'm going through how to remap the materials from a FONG, which is what you would normally get in the old version of the plugin, from Max to Maya. But yeah, by accident this morning when I tried it, I realized that the 2021 version of Max's exporter actually does include the Arnold definition, so you don't have to do that part again if you're using Max 2021, so just keep that in mind. Other than that, it should be good to go. So I'm going to hit save and hit OK. And it's a small file, so it shouldn't take that long to export. So with that done, I'm going to bring Maya up. I'm going to create a new file. I thought I already had it resized. And you've got two options. You can either open the scene or import the scene. Maya will support both. Personally, for a new file like this, I usually open. Now, the thing you have to watch out for is, at this point, it might not show up, and you start to think, oh, I did something wrong, or the file doesn't work. Be aware that Maya's default file type is set to Maya, so it will only see Maya files. It's right at the very bottom of the open menu. To see the FBX file as well, you're going to have to choose all files instead. And then with all files activated, you should see your FBX file appear. So I've got car export. There it is. I'm going to open that up. And again, don't panic if your screen turns black. Depending on the scale in Max and the units that you used, your file in Maya may be quite large. So if you see something like that, just zoom out. And sure enough, that's what happened. My car was just zoomed in. It's bigger than the grid, and the camera was actually inside the car when it was first exported. Another question I get at this point is, oh, my textures aren't showing up. What do I do? That's because Maya's default viewing mode in the viewport is not textured. It's shaded. So what we're looking at right now is shaded mode, which just shows the lighting and the surface, but no texturing. So if you want to switch between the three modes that are available, the three main ones anyway, 4 on the keyboard is wireframe, 5 on the keyboard is shaded mode, and 6 on the keyboard is textured mode. So I'm just hitting the 6 key to activate texture mode, and now I can see that it looks like everything is in place. And just to confirm, I'm going to open up my material editor. And this is where it differs from the previous videos I had posted, because this is a new feature, it seems, in Max 2021. But if I double click on any of these materials, they're actually already Arnold standard materials, which is fantastic. Saves you guys a step. So if you've already got your Arnold materials set up with your substance maps plugged in, the 2021 version of Max should support that and open correctly. So that'll save you, like I said, the having to convert these materials over to Arnold yourselves, which is always, anytime you can save a few seconds and put that into something else, that's always a good thing. So if you don't have Max 2021 installed yet, I would get right to the Autodesk student download page and grab it to make sure you're up to date. Now, I did mention I was going to go through grouping it in Maya so that you can get all these pieces together. So I intentionally exported it in multiple parts. So if I wanted to handle this in Maya, because what happens is, and what's happened to a few of you, I'm sure, you brought your model in, and now you want to adjust the cameras and to get the vehicle or your model lined up with the scene, and you grab it, activate the rotate tool, and as it happens, mine is actually working fine, of course. I'm just gonna, it's because I already had it cleaned up, I'm gonna break it on purpose. No, I'll try that again. Yeah, this is likely what's going to happen to most of you if you try to rotate or scale inside of Maya, which is obviously wrong. By default, Maya will always function on a per object basis. So even though I've got multiple objects selected, in Max you can set it up so that it's the center of the selection that is your move point. Maya doesn't have that feature. Maya will always interact with the objects from their own pivot point. So each of these objects has a different pivot, and because of that, it doesn't allow that sort of kind of movement as if it's one piece. So we've got two ways to tackle this. We can either group this into a group and then move the group, which will give them all the shared pivot point, or we can do pretty much the Maya version of what we did in Max. We can attach all these together using Maya's version of attach, which is actually called the combine tool. So I'll show you the group first. Now to do this, I would recommend go to Windows and open up the Outliner. And you can dock it to the side if you want. It's a useful tool, very similar to Max's scene navigation option that it has on by default nowadays. So And you'll see why it's so important to have this active while you're doing this grouping, especially if you're new to Maya or new to this type of workflow in Maya. Now, also notice the labeling in Max came through, so all the names I chose in Max are 100% in place here, so I don't need to rename anything. So let's go ahead and group this. So the cool thing about the outliner is you can use it to organize your scene and give you a little bit more awareness. Sometimes it's just as easy and just as quick to select things in the viewport, but sometimes in a more complex scene, it actually can be simpler to select things here. If you're smart and build prefix values into your naming conventions, then you could use the search command to filter it out very quickly and easily. So for example, if I said car underscore before every one of the pieces of the car, I could filter that and find all the car parts really quickly and easily, and just again speed up your workflow and make things more efficient. I'm going to just quickly grab them in the viewport. And to group these, any selection in Maya, to group it, you literally just hit Control G. And if we look over here in the outliner, you can see what's happened. It's taken that selection and stored it inside of a node called Group 1. And there's a little plus that now appears in front of this node. If I click the plus, you can see there's all the car parts. They all still exist. They're all still separate, but now they're grouped under a common node. And you can see I can select the gizmo for the group and still move it. Now, this is where a lot of people mess up, again, being used to Max. So you've grouped it. In Max, when you create a group by default, that group is what's called closed. And you can essentially select the car just by single clicking a part of it and rotate, scale, it acts as if it's one object. That's not the case in Maya. When you select in the viewport, it still selects the parts of the group. So if I were to drag a box around the car, knowing that it's grouped now, it's like, oh, now I can rotate it. Corey said just group it and away I go. Nope, it doesn't work that way. Maya doesn't create a closed group. The group is there and it's selectable, but it is not default, or it's not the default selection when you single click or drag a box in the viewport. The viewport, but in its default settings, will always get you the individual objects still. So how do I get the group? Obviously, with the outliner open, you can single click on the group there. Now, because I've selected the group directly, I know it's safe to rotate. However, there is a very quick and easy way to do it in the viewport. I mentioned earlier, this group creates a hierarchy. These are all considered children of the group parent. And you can see there's this chain here branching off into each. That shows that these are children. And the plus means that this is a parent. So because there's a hierarchy involved, I can actually use the Maya's hierarchy hotkeys. And essentially, if you select any child of a hierarchy, in this case our group, in Maya, if you want to get the parent, all you got to do, so I'm going to select the body of the car. If I, on the keyboard, just hit the up arrow. And that is the hotkey to step up to the next highest level of the hierarchy, which is the group. So I can literally select any part of this car because I know that I've grouped it. If I just hit the up arrow, it will grab the group and I can see that visually in the outliner. Again, another reason why I suggest opening the outliner as a beginner, it gives you that visual feedback and you've got confidence that, yep, I got the right node selected. Once you get down to it and you're comfortable with Maya and you know how these systems work, you won't need this visible all the time, but it never hurts. It definitely is a good bit of visual feedback. So again, select anything that you know is part of the group, hit the up arrow, it will jump to the group, and now it's safe to navigate and rotate, scale, move, whatever you need to do with your object. Now, if I didn't want to group it, so I'm going to get rid of this group. If I didn't want to group it, if I instead wanted to attach it like I did in Max, then you're going to use the combine tool, which is, again, is Maya's version of attach. So I would select all the pieces of the car, either in the viewport or in the outliner. I would make sure I'm in the modeling menu set. Then I will go to mesh, combine. And then what happens is I get one object. There's sometimes, depending on how you had your file set up, you may end up with these transform nodes. You can see I've got a bunch of them here. I actually don't want these. It's going to create confusion. I'm not going to talk about what transform nodes are. That's beyond the scope of what I want to get into today. But I will show you how to get rid of them. You can't just delete a transform node. It's there for a reason. And if you delete it, Maya will just create a fresh one. So it's all to do with Maya's construction history. Maya kind of creates a running history of everything you do. And at certain points, it's actually a good idea to delete that history, and this is one of them. So the construction history doesn't really help me at this point. I'm happy with the model. Everything I've done, I don't need to undo it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the car or the new version of it. I should rename it, by the way. It looks like it inherited the name of the wheel, which is kind of the worst name. So I'm going to call that combined car or car combined, whatever, as long as I know what it is. So I've got a good label. I'm going to select that, and to delete the construction history, and I would recommend if you combine these using that tool I just showed you, the combine tool, I would recommend doing this right away. So go to select your object, go to edit, delete by type, history. Delete by type will only affect selected objects. Delete all by type will affect the entire scene, which can break things, especially if you've got character rigs or anything like that. So I would recommend to play it safe, and unless you really know what you're doing, only use delete by type and select specifically what it is you want to work with. In this case, I want to delete the history on the entire car, so I've got the whole thing selected. So I'm going to delete the history, and you can see all those transform nodes have disappeared. It essentially the history that was causing that, and it was creating a reference to help the car kind of remember where it was and remember where it came from in the first place before I adjusted it. And I don't need that information. So by deleting the history, you're essentially erasing Maya's memory of, or this piece of geometry's memory as to where it came from. So deleting the history in this situation is actually a really good idea. And that is pretty much it. At this point, my car is one singular node or a grouped node if I just chose to go that route. And now I'm pretty much ready to bring in the HDR and the lighting and get the camera matched up so that this thing is ready for rendering.